Good evening and welcome to Today on Talk Show. The government has announced last week a new set of basic academic skills for secondary level students. It will be implemented gradually over the next 3 years. It's the latest step as part of Macau's cycle of reforms covering the city's non-tertiary education. The move comes at a time when local education authorities are pushing for the expansion of Mandarin as medium of instruction in Chinese language lessons. Our guest is Teresa Vong, a well-seasoned education scholar and associate professor at the University of Macau's Faculty of Education. Professor Teresa Vong, thank you very much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you.
You've been conducting extensively research on Macau's education policies and reforms. I'd like to hear from you on the new set of basic academic skills for high school students. What's the main takeaway from this?
Well, I think we all need to know that the curriculum framework actually announced in 2014, and then followed by the curriculum framework, then came the new sets of skills and requirements. So we better understand that the skills and the requirements are actually the extensions of the curriculum. And which is very interesting because instead of using standards, we use requirements, which shows that it is less rigid than those of employing standards. Well, I can tell most of the countries, some of the countries like China or Taiwan, they use standards instead of requirements. Well, which means that in Macau, in terms of curriculum development, for teachers and even schools, they have more flexibility and more room to negotiate their own school-based curriculum. So this is a very recent development. And of course, these sets of skills actually, which also lead to a very standardized curriculum in Macau, which is quite unusual, particularly in the past. We have the official curriculum in name or on paper, but nowadays we have the practical one at all the school levels. So this is a very recent development. Yeah.
Would you say that the government is on the right track in putting forth this set of requirements?
Well, from the perspective of government, I do think it's her right track, because when we talk about the standardization of curriculum, it shows a strong government regime, and also it demonstrates that the needs of to be accountable to the general public. So as soon as we use a lot of money to put in the universal free education, so we need to be more accountable.
There's a trade-off somehow.
Yes, and this is one of the frequently practiced measures to be adopted by the government to safeguard the quality of education on the one hand, and to make schools or teachers or education to be accountable on the other.
But of course, one may look at things otherwise, highlighting the flip side of the whole situation, in the sense that the autonomy of the schools is shrinking. Would that be the case?
Well, possibly yes, because when we talk about the official curriculum, it means that all the schools should follow. So it means that different from the past, we can tailor or design our own curriculum. But nowadays, we need to follow the codes and the skills or the basic requirements stated in that, in that document. So comparatively speaking, we have less autonomy. But at the same time, I think we need all to look at the document itself. It is quite big and large, so it embraces quite a lot of things. So it doesn't necessarily constrain a lot of teaching methods. So it just identify the areas and the domains of learning. So I think it is quite flexible in a way. But of course, as far as I know, currently we have the implementation till the 9th, the Junior 3. For me, I understand that the document itself was actually published in Chinese and Portuguese. So how about the English-speaking school?
That's a question, right? And especially for many of our
viewers.
So
I heard that quite a lot of teachers from the English-speaking schools, particularly they are not Chinese or not Portuguese, they are foreigners. They have no clues to use these basic skills or requirements to put it into practice. So I think this is one of the major issues.
So there should be a translation at least for reference for them?
Yeah, well, as far as I know, they have a draft version provided, but as far as I know, they don't provide, I mean, the DSCJ did not provide the final version. So according to my knowledge, some of the schools, they have the bilingual teachers, so they understand Chinese and English, so they will do the translation at the school level. But it is not I think it's not appropriate. So I do think in the coming years, so the senior secondary school, the skills and the requirements are going to implement in the coming 3 years.
Exactly.
So they need to prepare the English version, because I think at least we have a few English-speaking schools, not to mention about the international schools. So I think basically using English as the first medium of instruction. So I do think the Education and Youth Bureau, they need to provide a translated version in order to facilitate the implementation of such policy. Yeah.
You were mentioning that on the one hand, it is a comprehensive document, listing out the competences that are required, but you do believe that with regards to teaching methods, it does allow a great deal of flexibility. But then my question goes to the issue of the Macau tradition. Macau tradition has been pretty much, some would say, fragmented, has not been standardized at all, and now we are moving gradually towards standardization. If you look at the thing from a perspective of someone who's been conducting research over the last couple of decades or so, where do you see us in 10 years with regards to this move towards standardization?
Well, I do think standardization is a key word, and in the coming 10 years, should be a trend. When we look at, in terms of curriculum development, we can name 2 subjects at least. For instance, the moral and civic education and Chinese history, actually in the coming years. So we have the textbook. We have the textbook published, by the DSCJ and the People's Education Press by the mainland. So this is the most obvious 2 subjects to be standardized in,
But these are controversial subjects, I would say.
Yes,
potentially, I say.
Yes. So this is I can say standardization, came from these 2 basic subjects at the first priority of the government. So when we look at this, standardization is going to be the keyword and the major development in Macau. However, my concern is standardization is not at all easy for other subjects, because currently a lot of schools, they have quite a lot of autonomy to adopt the textbooks. They can adopt the textbooks from mainland China, from Hong Kong, or from the UK, or some even from Singapore. So in this case, I would consider this is kind of imported curriculum from these countries. So standardization is not so easy for other subjects, because well, I can't see the government is going, to put the similar efforts to these subjects, like the moral and civic education and the Chinese history, to these subjects. So I think standardization would be a trend, but it's not so easy for other subjects.
Talking about Chinese history,
yes.
Before moving on to the issue of moral and civic education, the chief executive in the policy address for this
yes.
year, for 2017, said that things were moving on steadily in order to adopt a standardized history textbook for local middle and high schools. Yeah. And back then you told the newspaper, Macau Daily Times, that you somehow were casting a skeptical eye on this. Why is that?
Well, this is my personal concern. As we know that, well, history, I can say, is the very first citizenship discipline before, the birth of moral and civic education. So this is a very basic subject to educate citizens for the place or for the country. So it is evident that the government is very conscious about that. Well, history for the local people is one of the ways to prepare them, to love their country, to develop a sense of belongings and their own identity. So it is evident that the government makes such a move. But my personal concern is that because the local government is going to invite the People's Education Press, which I would consider is an official voice from the central government. My concern is that how this official or semi-official entity would choose the historical materials for the local Chinese history. I mean, for the context, because when we talk about history, we also talk about different ideology. Mm-hmm. We understand that one country and two systems is the basic principle, and we acknowledge this is pretty important, for the sustainability of Macau. But my question is, which one can embrace more? For instance, I would say, how can the ideology of a socialist ideology can embrace the capitalist ideology, or vice versa? So, based on what criteria the People's Education Press can select the proper materials for local schools or, for the local citizens. So this is my concern. So, are
you worried about some sort of brainwashing in this respect, especially in what concerns contemporary history?
Yes, because based on different criteria, the teaching material would be totally different. For instance, when we talk about, well, sometimes we call this is fact, and sometimes we call it history, because it all depends on the time of validation, right? So when we talk about something already happened in Macau, however, based on different ideology, which may not be chosen by the authority or be chosen by the press to be included in the text, like the 4th of June.
Sure, so, I was going to mention the
this massacre. Well, this is my concern, and of course, I would say if DSCJ is going to include more, local people to discuss or to talk about this, because it would be very, I would say, it would be very significant if our history is shaped or formed by other entity. There is a risk we have a blank one, we have a blank period, because for those incidents we consider that it did exist in the past, and it is significant to us, which may be considered by other entity, well, this is not correct. So our memory or our history would become empty, vacuum. So this is my personal concern.
So let's say, for instance, other contentious matters, especially when you're talking about the 20th century, the second half, like the Great Leap Forward, Cultural Revolution.
Yes, yes.
And all these matters, it would probably pose a challenge, right?
Well, even in the contemporary, I think even in the Chinese history used by mainland, well, these already included in their text. So this would not be the case. But I mean, if we want a textbook particularly tailored for Macau people, so the text or the teaching material should be the context, the real context of the local people. So, well, this is my personal, concern that, well, how they will handle these issues.
The issue of history, and some people and experts are also saying, and this is not something new, that there's a need for local students, be it primary or secondary students, to have a much better and deeper knowledge of the history of Macau.
Yeah.
How to address this? Because how to have a standardized history textbook about Macau?
Well, for me, I know there is an experience. For instance, I remember I have a conference. It's about Chinese history, and actually the history about concerning the Nanjing. So this the Mandarin, and also from the perspective of Japanese, how they look at the issues. So actually, they set up two expert teams.
The Nanjing Massacre.
Yes, so they have two expert teams. They talk about these issues. Well, they try to make a conclusion. The conclusion they can accepted by two parties. Well, this is one of the way how to deal with the history on this side, and the other side is I forgot is about China, Korea, and Japanese as well. So they have three teams to talk about this. So not only one side decide for the others. So this is, I think this is one of the way. And of course, in responding to how the students, they learn their own history, for instance, in Macau, for me, I read the newspapers and I have heard some comments about that. Well, the people say, well, if they don't, if they don't settle or deal with, handle the issues concerning Macau, so teachers, if they have sufficient knowledge, so they can deliver to the students. But for me, I think a textbook is more comprehensive. So if a textbook has some significant issues concerning the territory, so it would be easier for the teachers. So particularly for those young teachers who have never experienced 4th of June, they can't tell, they can't deliver, this history. They just pick up the history, maybe, the knowledge from their parents or from the older historians. So I do think the best way to keep the Macau history is put it on the paper. But my personal concern is I don't know how this entity or the press will deal with these sensitive issues to the central government, but was a fact happened some years before, so I don't know how they can deal with this. So I just pose my concern, and hopefully I wish and I hope the government can do a lot of conciliation and reconciliation about this.
when we had the visit of China's top legislator, the chairman of the National People's Congress, Zhang Dejiang, there was one of the key messages regarding the need to further enhance national or patriotic leaning education in order to strengthen the sense of Chineseness and this concept of love China, love Macau. So, do you see the need for this kind of move, and what is the rationale behind this push that we are witnessing, at least for now, in terms of the rhetoric and the official speeches, focusing on the need to enhance this kind of awareness?
Well, I think the enhancement of such awareness possibly is, well, this message is delivered to two special administrative regions. So one is Hong Kong and one is Macau. And on the Macau side, I do believe that in terms of education, we have already done quite a lot. And in effect, the schooling systems in Macau is quite different from Hong Kong. And a majority of the schools, they have the pro-China background. So I can't see there is any conflicts. And in effect, I mean, in terms of the love China and love Macau, I do think DSEJ has already done a good job in terms of this. And in the coming future, I don't think we have conflicts concerning these issues.
So you're saying that much has already been done and it's not so much of an issue in Macau you have in Hong Kong?
Yes, different, so different.
It's not a problem here, right?
And I think the structure, the school structures in Macau is quite different from Hong Kong. For instance, in Macau, we have maybe a majority of the schools, they have a very pro-China background. And these schools have very good practice of, raising the national flags, long before, maybe before the, 1909. So we have a very traditional, good practice in terms of this. So I don't think we just do in a natural way would be fine, would be perfectly fine,
Now this leads me to the issue of, which is, some would say, somehow connected, of promoting and expanding Mandarin as medium of instruction in Chinese language lessons. This has been a key message conveyed by the Education Bureau. They did like to see that happening, encouraging that. This is not something entirely new. We've seen this kind of approach also in Hong Kong. But what about Macau? And how do you regard this? Is there a need for that?
Well, I don't have any clues of proposing such agenda, by the Education and Youth Bureau. Because in Macau, we have a very long tradition, for some schools, to use Mandarin as a medium of instruction. As far as I remember, in mid-80s, so this last century, quite a number of schools employed the retired professors from the universities to teach in secondary schools. So they use Mandarin, to teach. And of course, some of the students say at that time, they don't have any background of Mandarin, so they have difficulties to learn. So in Macau, using Mandarin as a medium of instruction has a very long tradition practice. So I don't see the purpose of raising or proposing such an agenda. For communication purpose, or to enhance...
wouldn't that make them, the students in the future, more competitive in the job market if their Mandarin proficiency in Putonghua is much higher, or even for them to work in the mainland or something along these lines?
I don't think, using Mandarin as a medium of instruction, can help much, because when we go to school and talk to the kindergartens, or even some of the primary school, they can master Mandarin pretty well. So if we really want, we want to enhance their proficiency, so you just set up, a Mandarin class, language class, would serve the purpose. But if you use Mandarin to teach geography or biology, is another issue. So if you really want to enhance the proficiency, and then you put in more effort to create a class or the immersion course or programs, so try not to, to use Mandarin to teach biology or other, because it's nothing to do, to enhance the proficiency by using Mandarin to teach biology.
But if that does happen, and if you witness an expansion significantly, would you agree with those who are particularly worried that somewhere down the road Cantonese may be under threat to some extent?
Well, yes, of course, yes. I serve as a judge in poems competition, or storytelling. Every now and then, more and more students, they use Mandarin to tell the story instead of Cantonese. So I do think the language proficiency of Mandarin is getting higher, is getting better.
At the expense of Cantonese?
Yes. I do think that because I have served as a judge in a storytelling local context for maybe over 5 to 7 years. So I witnessed there are more students, they use Mandarin to tell the story instead of Cantonese. So I do think that this reflects that the teachers, they use Mandarin quite comfortable at the school levels, so they can prepare the students to use Mandarin to talk. And of course, we can't ignore another, significant factor, is that quite a number of students, immigrants, they're actually from mainland, and they use Mandarin already. So when we look at, the student population,
the
maybe,
demographics,
yes,
the situation is changing, right?
It's changing. So I don't think Mandarin is an issue in Macau.
So one last question. This is also about Cantonese, but Cantonese not only as a language or dialect. I don't know how to put things that. But anyway. But also as a key component of the local identity of Macau, the Macau Chinese and the Macanese as well. If, let's look ahead, let's look in the coming 10 to 20 years. Would that be a problem for Macau? Would that be an issue? And what are your main concerns in this respect?
Yeah, if we don't think of any measures to protect Cantonese, or to enhance Cantonese, in the coming 10 or 20 years, it would be quite similar the case in Guangzhou. So in Guangdong province, the second generation of the family, they don't speak Cantonese at home. So if we consider Cantonese is a very a core identity of local people, which makes a difference from the, from other places or other provinces of, of mainland. So try to consider of measures and ways to
what
preserve.
What kind of measures could we look at? Because we are facing this demographic transformations in Macau. If you look at the new migrants and also the student population and everything, what sort of measures could be adopted to protect Cantonese and even promote Cantonese culturally, linguistically, and also to portray Macau's own identity?
Yeah, well, I remember one of the colleague in University of Macau who is an expert in Cantonese, and he mentioned that Cantonese is the traditional dialect in the province, or even in our languages. So all we need to do is try to make the students to appreciate Cantonese, the songs of the
Poems?
Yeah, the poems and the songs, etc. So, and the other thing is, well, is of course is sometimes anticlimax. Well, we try not to push Mandarin forward, so a bit forward or advance. Try to keep the balance, because at the moment Mandarin as communication, or we have classes already. But we don't have class for Mandarin because we assume that this is our mother tongue, right? So what we need to do is forget about the idea of using Mandarin as a medium of instruction to teach biology or geography. Try to maintain, Cantonese.
What about teaching Cantonese to non-Cantonese speakers?
Yeah, this is one
I'm
of the
talking about
way.
like those who are Mandarin speakers or Portuguese speakers or English speakers.
Yes, this is one of the way, but I know it is pretty difficult, for foreigners, because Cantonese, the song, actually we have the tones.
Yes.
We have 9 tones. So most of the foreigners, they would rather prefer to learn Mandarin than to learn Cantonese. So this is their choice. But of course, I think the government should preserve, should commit, herself to support a healthy development of Cantonese. Yes.
And with this, we finish our conversation, our talk. Professor Teresa Vong, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Pleasure to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks.
And to you at home, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week.